Hi there, Sitecore enthusiasts, and welcome to the next episode of Friday Sitecore Best Practices. My name is Vasily Fomichev, and I'm a Sitecore Technology MVP. In this episode, I'd like to talk to you about publishing in Sitecore. What that is, what that means in Sitecore, and some of the recommended practices around that. So let's start with what publishing really is. As we already know, all the content edits in Sitecore are made in the master database by default. Publishing is a process of copying the delta record, so the changes and updates that we made in the master database, over to the deliver database, and by default that database is named web. So there's one more thing, important thing, that happens every time we publish. And we can see that in the configuration. If we search for site, helps if I spell right, singular, there we go. Notice this publish end event, and by default it clears the cache for the website, which is the default site that comes with the Sitecore installation. Usually when we add custom websites to Sitecore, we also add our site names, or should be adding our site names hopefully, to the publish end event for cache clearing. So what does this cache clearing do? So it clears out the HTML caches for the presentation layer, whether it's renderings or sublayouts. So once the caches are cleared, the next request will be a bit slower. So the first request after the publish has completed will be a bit slower than the rest, because now Sitecore has to re-render the renderings or the sublayouts from scratch, and then cache them, and then the subsequent requests will pull that information from the cache and will perform much better. So that leads us to the first recommended practice: is do not publish excessively in production. That will affect your website performance. So every time we publish again, that clears out the cache and slows down the next request for the website. I know some companies mitigate that by integrating an HTTP request to some website pages right after the publish, but that's getting a little hacky and unnecessary, and I really don't recommend that. But you know, if you're really up against the wall, that's one way to make sure that your users aren't affected as much by frequent publishing. So let's take a look at what the publishing process looks like in Sitecore. Let's say we made a change to an item, home. Now, being logged in as an admin, I don't follow the workflow process. I override that. If I were a content author, so this would actually create a new version of the home item and place it into the initial step of the sample Sitecore workflow, which is the default workflow that Sitecore comes with. Once the change has gone through the workflow, it would get to the final state, and that means it's ready for publishing. We can publish that in a couple ways. We can publish it manually by simply publishing the item or the site. There are actually three options for publishing the site. There's incremental, publish only the changed items. So Sitecore keeps track of the items that have changed in the master database. Smart publish publishes the differences between the source and target databases, which is actually the preferred method of publishing. Why? Well, some people might question this, because incremental publish also publishes just the changes. Well, the problem is that there's no guarantee that the source database hasn't changed in the meantime, right? So Smart Publish is the preferred way of publishing. Republish publishes everything. So every single item, you'll notice thousands and thousands of items being published when you choose this option. Of course, we have a choice for languages and targets. In production, hopefully you have another preview target here that you can publish using the workflow, or auto-publish using the workflow for preview purposes before actually going live. So that's the first way, manually. Now the second way to publish will be to automate that process. We can actually do that in a couple ways as well. We can create a custom task under the system, tasks, create a custom command, and have it run on schedule, just like these commands and schedules that come with Sitecore. That is only if we have to expose that setting to content authors. If we want to restrict that and keep that away from content authors at any cost, we can do that in configuration. So configuration allows us to schedule publishing, quote unquote. Really what it's allowing us to do is set publishing intervals. So we can set publishing intervals of let's say 23.59 minutes, which is actually important because of the lag and the way Sitecore does publishing, the way Sitecore, not publishing, scheduling, the way Sitecore scheduling works. The task may not fire at the exact time. It might have some other processes run in the meantime that Sitecore has to wait for to complete. So you know, it's usually a good idea to give it some room, some breathing room for publishing. But usually, you know, we want to schedule our publishing around the downtime, so probably sometime at night, you know, when the traffic is low. And that is actually the preferred way of publishing. In fact, what we usually do in our solutions, what I personally do in all of my Sitecore projects, is I hide the publishing button from the content editor and from the experience editor from content authors, so they can't manually publish it. Even though the item is in the approved state, again, remember, every time we publish, that clears the HTML cache and that affects performance of the website. So, let's see here. So we talked about publishing, scheduling. So let's take a look at the restrictions. So this is another really cool thing that I don't really see used that often. However, that could save your vacation. So let's say you need to publish a promotion or a campaign page at a certain time, certain date, certain time. This is the place to do that. This is where we can specify publishing settings for versions, publishing settings for items, and targets as well. So we can actually say where and when this particular item or version is allowed to be published. So we can specify here that this particular version of the item is only allowed to be live from this date to this date, from this date and time to this date and time. If we only specify the from date, it'll be live indefinitely starting with this date. If we only specify the to date, it'll be published as soon as the next publish event runs up until the publish to date, and once that date is reached, the next time the publish is run, whether it's manual or automated, the item will be unpublished. So this is actually a good segue into how publishing works in Sitecore, how automated publishing works in Sitecore. So we're not actually scheduling publishing to run at a certain time with these publishing settings. We're scheduling when this particular item or version is allowed to be published. With automated publishing, publisher runs on a certain schedule, whether it's once a day or at night, a few times a day. That's also configurable. So some companies prefer to have publishing happen several times a day at downtime intervals. That's also possible. So publisher runs on schedule, and every time it runs, it evaluates items and it checks the publishing restrictions. So if the item is not supposed to be published during that time, it'll ignore it. If the item is allowed to be published during that time, it'll publish it. So these publishing settings don't actually set the time for the publisher to run. These settings set the time and the date and the time when the item or version is allowed to be published. So what that means is, let's say a content author sets the date. Let's say today the item is supposed to go out at 8 p.m. However, the publisher doesn't run until 1 a.m. So the item actually won't be live until the publisher runs, even though we set it to be live at 8 p.m. using the restrictions. Because remember, restrictions are just that. They're not affecting the time or the schedule that the automated scheduler runs at. It simply says, starting at this time, this item or version can now be published. Okay? So that's an important distinction. Alright, so let's see, we talked about manual automated publishing and we talked about restrictions. I think that covers it for this one. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more tips like this. Check out cmsbestpractices.com, and I'll see you next Friday. Over and out.